Okay, so the human digestive system is complete. We have a mouth and we have an anus, and we also have compartmentalization. So generally food goes through our digestive system in one direction. And that is important because the different parts of our digestive system can then have different internal environments. And so different chemical reactions could occur in different places. So when we look at the beginning of our digestive tract, we have the mouth. This is sometimes referred to as the oral cavity. A couple of things that are important in our oral cavity is that we have a tongue. The tongue manipulates food, and it also has sensory structures. So it allows us to detect, like, is this food sweet? Does it have a lot of sugar in it? Does it have a lot of salt? Maybe we're craving a nutrient that we need, right? And being able to detect what is in our food is important. So that's the tongue. We also have teeth, which allow us to chew our food and before we swallow it. The tongue also manipulates the food into a bolus, and that is also important in swallowing. In the oral cavity, we also have salivary glands. Okay, so we have the tongue, we have teeth, and we have salivary glands. And these salivary glands actually sit like underneath our tongue, underneath our jaw, right? And they produce saliva. From the mouth, our food that is swallowed goes to the pharynx. And when we swallow our food, we swallow it as a bolus, okay? So we swallow food as a bolus. The reason why we don't want to inhale our food is that we want the food to close off. We actually want the water, if we're drinking water, it has to also close off the trachea. So this bolus of food is important because the valve that controls what goes into our trachea versus our esophagus is a mechanical valve. So this pharynx can be defined as a common opening to the digestive and respiratory organs. Tracts. It's our throat. If you think about it, primitive chordates, right, had pharyngeal gill slits. As embryos, we have pharyngeal gill slits. Some people have a remnant of a gill that's like right above their ear, right? But we get rid of that, but we still have this problem where we don't have a separate opening for our air and our food, right? Sometimes they do create a separate opening by doing a tracheotomy where they put a hole in your trachea so you can breathe directly, but we're kind of limited. If you think about insects, they do not have this problem. Their mouth is not the opening to their respiratory tract. They have holes along their abdomen called spiracles that they use to breathe, and then their mouth is just food and liquid, right? So that is a difference between chordates and other types of organisms. Okay, so we have to close off. So the bolus closes off the trachea by pressing down on the epiglottis. So the epiglottis is like it's cartilage, and it's just the pressing down of the food when you swallow is what keeps it from going into your trachea, and the esophagus is behind the trachea. So it funnels food and liquid into your esophagus and away from your lungs. So that would be the first part of the digestive system. So the food and liquid, oops, liquid, they go into the esophagus. So let's look at a diagram of a digestive system, our digestive system. The tongue, skeletal muscle under voluntary control, also really important for speech, right? Salivary glands. We have big salivary glands also in our cheek. The mumps virus infects those and causes it to swell. We get mumps. This is not showing the trachea, which would be in front. This is just showing the esophagus. The esophagus is important because it actually is a passageway from your pharynx to your stomach. So that is how food travels to the stomach. Interestingly, your esophagus actually pierces the diaphragm. So the diaphragm sits somewhere there, and the esophagus has to travel through the diaphragm. So it is traveling through your thoracic region of your body and into the abdominal region. The diaphragm is what separates your thoracic body cavity and your abdominal body cavity. The esophagus is kind of interesting. It is composed of smooth muscle. And smooth muscle is under control of the autonomic nervous system, so it is involuntary. So it contracts involuntary, or maybe involuntary contraction would be better. Okay, so once we swallow something, we do not have to think about pushing it down, right? And the wave of muscle contraction that forces stuff down and towards your stomach is what is called peristalsis. So this is the wave of muscle contraction. The esophagus is not just muscle. It is actually lined with epithelial tissue that is stratified like our skin. So it protects it because sometimes we don't chew our food properly. You probably have experienced this, like if you've swallowed a sharp chip and you can feel it moving down and it's scraping the inside of your esophagus as it goes, right? And you can feel it move down. The other interesting thing is sometimes things get stuck in our esophagus, like, for example, vitamins. They have that gelatinous coat oftentimes, and then they get stuck in there and you're like, I can feel my esophagus contracting, and it might be like annoying. You're like, it's stuck in my throat and I can feel it. You could almost feel it trying to force it down to your stomach. And then generally you have to take a drink of water and maybe a piece of food to get it unstuck from the side of your esophagus. So that is transporting stuff down to the stomach.